Okay, so today's class we are going to cover 12.3, which is genetic changes, and we're also going to cover 12.4, which is issues in genetic research. So firstly, genetic changes, which are also called mutations. So most of the time, the process of cell reproduction and copying the genes, it works well. Mistakes can happen during reproduction when chromosomes are copied. In most cases, body cells recognize the errors and will fix them, but in other cases, a cell's repair mechanisms, they can fail. And then these mistakes can then be passed on from generation to generation. So such changes in genetic information can result in an abnormal gene, and that is a mutation. So a mutation is a change in genetic information because of an abnormal gene, and these mutations, they may be beneficial, they may be harmful, or they may be neither. They may not be beneficial or harmful, they're just there. And mutations can occur in several ways. Here we're just looking at a diagram. Gene A here is producing normal hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is part of the blood cells. And then here, the gene A, lowercase a, this is showing the same segment after a mutation. All right, so if we look at our genetic code here, we have G, C, A, T, and AT. And if we look here, this second one here has been mixed up, and that is what is causing that mutation. So this gene here, the lowercase a, will produce defective hemoglobin, which causes a disease called sickle cell anemia. All right, there's a couple videos here on how does disease change the shape of cells. It's on sickle cell anemia, as well as this one here. It's also on sickle cell anemia. So mutagens, exposure to environmental factors can also cause mutations. So any environmental factor that causes a mutation is called a mutagen. So this can include radiation, UV light, many chemicals such as PCBs, chemicals in cigarettes, in alcohol and other drugs can cause mutations. So those are examples of mutagens. Most of these errors do not pass from one generation to the next. When we have inherited genetic disorders, these will be passed on from generation to generation. So sometimes a mutation may be helpful. So if you think about a giraffe with a mutation for a longer neck, that increases their ability to obtain food. So that would be a beneficial mutation. Usually mutations result in genetic disorders, which result from alterations to the genes. So an example is sickle cell anemia. It results from an abnormal form of hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the substance in the red blood cells that carries oxygen through the body. So someone with sickle cell anemia has abnormal hemoglobin, which will lead to poor resistance to infection and low levels of iron in the blood. Genetic disorders caused by mutagens, so for example, radiation from X-ray machines, UV light in sunlight, or tanning lamps, they can cause mutations. And such radiation, it releases particles smaller than atoms into cells, which causes chromosomal changes. An overdose can cause cancer, skin burns, and other serious conditions. But doctors do use radiation beneficially as well to treat diseases such as cancer. They can focus a large dose of radiation on cancer cells and in an attempt to destroy the nucleus of those cancer cells. Damage to non-cancerous tissue is limited by shielding the healthy tissue from radiation, and the amount of radiation is also carefully monitored. So some dangerous chemicals and their effects on human embryos. So while the baby is still in the womb. Those human embryos are particularly at risk from exposure to mutagens. So for example, exposure to alcohol. Children born to mothers who consume any alcohol during their pregnancy can suffer from a condition called FASD, which is fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. The effects are low birth weight, facial and joint abnormalities, small heads, heart defects, and difficulties with learning, behavior, and mental health. Exposure to certain prescription and illegal drugs. Pregnant women should take prescription drugs only under a doctor's care. Doctors who know that a woman is pregnant, they look for medications that will not harm the fetus. The effects of prescription or illegal drugs are premature births, low birth weight, drug addiction at birth, possible mental limitations, possible birth defects. PCBs, these are chemicals present in things like paint, thinners, and other chemicals. PCBs, they stand for polychlorinated biphenyls. So they're a mixture of toxic chemicals. They're present in the environment because of improper disposal of wastes and consumer products. And some of these are linked to various forms of cancer, including liver and kidney cancer. So the effect on a fetus, low birth weight, mild symptoms that often disappear with age, like anemia, liver conditions, skin rashes, difficulties coordinating movement, and problems with short-term memory that can last several years. There's delays in normal development, and there's problems with the immune system as well. All right, so here is another video link here to watch on what happens when your DNA is damaged. And then these are the questions for 12.3. All right, so next we're going to look at 12.4, which is issues in genetic research. So the Human Genome Project, it's a very important scientific effort where all of the genes found in a complete set of chromosomes, all of the DNA, which forms a genome, are being mapped. So scientists are working on this genome project where they have mapped where each gene belongs on the 46 human chromosomes. And because of all of this knowledge, things like cloning and genetic engineering have developed. So with genetic engineering, scientists can transfer genes from one organism to another to give one organism the traits of another. And that is what genetic engineering is, transferring genes from one organism or type of organism to another. And an example here is scientists have inserted a spider gene into goats. So the goat will then produce a protein identical to the protein found in spider silk, and the protein is removed from the goat milk to produce these silk fibers, and which can be used to make bulletproof vests. All right, so this gene, this spider gene, is used to make that spider silk from their webs. So there is a little video I have here on that genetic engineering example with the spider silk and the goat's milk. All right, so someone who suspects they may have a genetic disorder, such as a genetic disposition towards, for example, cystic fibrosis or breast cancer, they may use genetic research to check their chances of developing a specific disease. A genetic counselor can gather medical information about the individual's family. They can analyze the person's chromosomes to help predict the chances of the person developing a particular disorder. And this is where things like ethics come into place. Is it ethical to do this? Another example here is amniocentesis. This is a procedure used to determine the chromosomal makeup of a fetus. So here we have a pregnant woman, and they're going to do this procedure of amniocentesis. And this test will show whether a fetus may have a genetic abnormality. So some parents use these tests to decide whether or not they're going to continue with the pregnancy. So basically, an ultrasound is used to locate the fetus to make sure that the fetus doesn't get damaged. They're going to insert this large hollow needle into this abdomen area and withdraw amniotic fluid, and then they'll do these genetic tests on that fluid. So benefits of genetic research. A benefit is identifying the source of thousands of genetic disorders, such as color blindness, hemophilia, cystic fibrosis. So if scientists can identify the gene that causes a disease, they may be able to alter that gene and then cure the condition. Another benefit is developing new drugs and treatments. Researchers identified the human DNA that's responsible for insulin production. They took that DNA, inserted it into bacteria. Now each time the bacteria cells divide, the human insulin gene is duplicated, and this produces an inexpensive supply of insulin for people who have diabetes. Another benefit is helping people make lifestyle choices. So by studying a family's genes, the scientists can determine which diseases people with that DNA are most likely to develop. So if there's a family history of heart disease, then this person might take special care to eat a low-fat diet and exercise regularly. Concerns about genetic research. These are just some examples. For example, what would happen if all parents decided they only want to have a male or female children? This is the kind of question people ask when discussing genetic research. It's ethical questions. What is right and what is wrong? Some ethical concerns deal with questions about who should have access to genetic information. For example, should employers be able to ask for genetic information about employees, and how might they use it? This here was the world's first cloned sheep. This is Dolly, the first sheep that was cloned, and she developed arthritis before she was 6 years old. And researchers, they don't know whether it was caused by environmental factors or genetic factors. But the scientific community was shocked and astonished when Dolly, the first cloned sheep, was born. The success with cloning Dolly sparked a lot of debate about the ethics of cloning other mammals or cloning humans. And some people think that cloning, it's a great hope for the future. Others reject this cloning technology as a dangerous abuse of science. This is a human embryo, this diagram here. So many people have ethical questions about using a human embryo to harvest stem cells. So these stem cells, they are unspecialized cells that are the building blocks for many body parts. So researchers are hoping to use these stem cells to treat a variety of diseases like Alzheimer's disease and maybe even grow new organs. But is it right? Is it ethical to kill an embryo in order to do this? All right, so continuing ethical issues and ethical concerns. Who has a right to genetic data that provide information about your chances of developing various conditions? What might happen if health insurance companies had access to everyone's genetic makeup? Maybe they will start refusing to provide some people with health insurance because they can see that they're predisposed to a certain disease. What might happen if an employer found out that an employee had genes that often result in substance abuse, right? Might the employee be fired? So a lot of ethical issues and concerns with genetic research. Personally now, would you want to know your genetic information that may tell you of a terrible disease that you may be likely to develop, and maybe you will be unable to do anything about it? How will this affect the way you live? You might suffer from depression. You might adopt behaviors that may put you more at risk. All right, so we're going to stop here for chapter 12, 12.4 questions, and then the chapter 12 review questions are here.